Balance. Come on. Blessings, blessings, blessings to you. This is Prophet Moronto. And in the background, Yusuf Olatunji, classic. Serenade. This is our original Egbaland spiritual / blues. As part of our folklore. Call it Akbala, some call it Were. They are dance suits. People dance slowly, at occasions, and I've chosen that as a background to this presentation because I want to talk about something that's in the air right now. There seems to be a misunderstanding that needs to be set straight. Thank God we have mouthpieces of God like Prophet Moronto and others, who came before and who may be after. Good time, that's my alarm. Who can set things straight and who can contribute to rejuvenation, to calming the storm. See, one of the functionalities of a prophet is to calm storms. And in the process of calming storms, we'll restore order. That's part of the functionalities of a prophet. We are not just predicting or lamenting or all the other things, we are not fortune tellers. We are mouthpieces of God. God uses prophets, strategically, different means. So I want to talk about the raging beef between Black Americans and motherland Africans. And my message is specifically to Black Americans, a beloved nation of Black people that I would say are subtly, clandestinely recognized by many parts of the world. They don't get credit for a lot of things that they have contributed to the globe. They have played the role of sacrificial lamb in many scenarios. And it's important to set certain things straight, especially for those who are doing publications, who are not well informed. See, one of the blunders or the anomalies, that content creators have is the audacity to put things out there that don't have substance. Content creators and people who maybe have created a following about themselves. And all of a sudden, they start to talk about matters that they have not researched very well. Be careful about that. So, I have documented certain things that I want to address. And this is for, moving forward. How do we evaluate people who we should take seriously? Okay. I am an appreciative scholar of African American studies. I studied information technology. While I was studying that, I came across African American studies and it changed my perspective forever. about what it means to be black and what it means to, what the essence of blackness should be. There are many who are asleep, and I think it's important. So, to get more concentration, I'm going to turn the music down. Okay. Thanks for enjoying. Give me a second. All right. That's good. So, I'm talking about the beef between African Americans and motherland Africans. If we have a new, I don't know if it's new or not, but there is a terminology known as the FBA, Foundation of Black Americans. They have the right to call themselves that. Many indigenous societies that have had the audacity to seek self-determination and, to seek freedom for themselves have benefited from the FBA movement, whether it's the civil rights movement of the 60s. They've contributed a lot to the struggle. There are many parts. There are people who are not even black. When they seek self-determination, they reference Malcolm X. They reference Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, so they've contributed a lot. They don't get credit for a lot of it. They are like the empath that's stripped of a lot of light by narcissists. Okay, and don't get credit. So African Americans portray the image of a version of chosen ones, and that's something that we cannot deny. See, even non-blacks adopt a lot of inventions that came from their pain. Everybody wants to benefit from their enjoyment, from the entertaining part of their experience, but nobody wants to join in their pain. So, like they say it, there's an African American proverb that says, they like our reading, but they don't like our blues. And that's very, very true. So I want to address the FBA and African Americans as a Black Studies scholar. Okay. And I'm not saying there are many topics involving African Americans I'm not qualified to speak on. Okay, and I'm not saying I'm the ultimate person to listen to, but I will not stay silent, without, because it's a gift and it's a privilege. African American Studies put me on the Dean's list for the first time when I nearly swam to the shore. I have to find, this is my own way of giving back, if I have to express it that way. This is my way of giving back. So, I want to let Black Americans know these fundamentals. You can add this to the fundamentals you already know about motherland Africans. I call them, indigenous Africans or motherland Africans, people who are from the motherland. Okay. There are certain foundational elements you must know about the general population. Now, there are needles in haystacks, okay, that are Pan-African in nature and that share the pain and are concerned, but not everybody is. So, these are some fundamentals that are essential about motherland Africans. Now, the first one is this. Never assume every African is a Pan-African. That's very simple. Never assume every African you see is Pan-African. Never assume that every time you see an African, he's going to raise a feast. Not all black folks are kinfolk on both sides of the spectrum, whether it is the African American or whether it's the motherland African. There will always be members of the population who don't care. And there are reasons for that. So, test all spirits in that respect. Okay? Number two, never assume every African feels the pain of your past. And, that's fact. Not every African is going to feel the pain of the negative past, the painful past of black Americans. Some just are ignorant of it. Not everybody participated in it. Some members of the African nations participated in it, but not everybody did. And not everybody puts that on their right hand. Not everybody rolls or rocks with the consciousness day in, day out. It's important to know that. So there are places you go if you are a passport bro, or you are a you are a returnee, or you are trying to reconcile with your origin. That's all well and good, but understand that there are places you will go where you expect that everybody there should be welcoming and should have the consciousness of black liberation and emancipation, and some people are just numb and are asleep and are not conscious and have been reduced to someone who does not really care about that every day. So never assume that every person that you meet who is motherland African is going to feel the pain of your past. And there are reasons for that. See, there are reasons for why not every African is a Pan-African. There are reasons for why every African does not feel the pain of your past. There are reasons for that. And it's important to get to the fundamentals of those reasons. Now, number 3, never assume every African is Sankofa compliant. I'm using terms that relate to, the quest for African American liberation. There are certain terms, maybe Swahilian terms, and there are certain Ma'atic, Hotep elements. There is the extreme right of it, there's the extreme left of it, there's the in between. I don't even know where it falls. But it's important to note that not every person is Sankofa compliant. You understand? There are trends, there are event occurrences, there are waves of experiences, regime changes, different systems of governments, and different cultural elements that sweep in and sweep out. And sometimes there is an erosion. The way Africans that fought for independence thought about themselves, because they were in solidarity with those who fought the civil rights movement, is not the way the Africans of today are. Understand that there is a difference. So you can't, don't live in that kind of fantasy world. Okay. Number 4, beware of misdirected consciousness. Okay. There is consciousness and there is conscious bondage. Even when you meet Africans or any person who says they're conscious, you need to test that person's spirit. Some use consciousness for exploitation. Some use it to take advantage of others. Some use the exploitation thing to push personal agenda. You understand? So that you don't get taken advantage of. Not everybody that sings the song of consciousness really lives by the creed. Let's be careful about that. In fact, it's better for your consciousness to manifest naturally than for you to proclaim it. So let's be careful about that. Okay. I believe consciousness should lift, not downgrade. Whenever you see someone whose consciousness is not uplifting, if that person's consciousness does not make them better than they are, what they have is conscious bondage, not consciousness. Okay. We've seen examples of how consciousness have lifted people's spirit. An example is one of the greatest talents to come out of Africa, Fela Kuti, whose consciousness was lifted by a black American lady known as Sandra Isidore. And it created a genre of music that's still making waves today. Okay. So you can trace whatever you're listening to today, Afrobeat, back to Sandra Isidore. If we have to really, if we put it in that perspective of roots. Okay. So that's important. Now, I also want to introduce you to the potential state of the mind of most contemporary Africans. When you look at Africans today, there's a spectrum for which their mentality falls on. Okay, you might come across a scholar, an African historical scholar like Professor Bumi Oyison, or Ali Mazrui, or those are needles in haystacks. Okay, it takes a certain kind of awakening to be like that. It's not everyone that is going to be like, going to see a lot of them like that. You understand? There are few people who are as conscious as that in Africa. Okay. But not everybody is going to be like that. What tendency will you see when you see a motherland African who is contemporary? And sometimes it's not their fault that they are like that. There is something that has led to that. And it's important that you must know. Okay. So most contemporary motherland Afros, okay, are gonna have these characteristics. Number one, they have like the contaminant of the European asili, if you know what I mean. If you are conscious, you know what I mean by that. You understand? There is the European seed that has been sown in them. It's like a thorn that the European puts in most motherland Africans. And when it grows, it corrodes every original fruit of the Africanness. The African has that by default. Okay. And that leads to the fact that you can almost call the modern day motherland African an unintended modern day European slave without knowing. They're like modern day slaves in transition. Unintended. They don't know that, but they are. You see, the educational curriculum that was handed down to them by Europeans, they were tricked to think that it made them equal to Europeans. But what it actually did, there were subtle elements in the curriculum and handed down to them that only conditioned them to be useful enough to serve Europeans, but not necessarily equal to Europeans. Because when you look at their societies, none of their societies look almost close to European societies. What most of their scholars end up doing is to want to live where they are to go serve European masters. There was something that was put in place for that to happen. So most motherland Africans are European slaves conditioned without knowing. You see, the education handed down to them was misdirected. They were wrongly pitched. They pitched the wrong stuff to them, and they thought it was like an original thing that would make them equal to Europeans. You see, the English part, I'll give you an example. Africans were not handed English literature as a curriculum. Instead, literature in English. You see, the culture of the language. In other words, don't focus on us. English literature means the study of English people. If you focus too much on us, you focus on our culture. And you will understudy our mentality and probably begin to take shots at us and question some of our motives. No, focus on the language. And we thought it was a good idea. After all, we are not supposed to learn European things. Let's focus on the language alone and use our own nuances and elements, to focus on English language. Ali bought 5 balls of akara. Efwa bought 6 balls of fufu. But it did us a disadvantage. Why? Because we're not able to study the European culture and understudy their mind. We're focused on English. When you see motherland Africans, they're always trying to speak bogus grammar, bogus English, because that was the objective, the learning objective that was pitched to them, was that they should be proficient enough to speak English and it will make them equal to their masters. But they took away the ability or the quest or the audacity to learn the culture of the Western folks. They only had snippets here and there. So that's one disadvantage that motherland Africans have. Okay. And why? So that they can be functional enough to serve Europeans, not to be equal to them. Okay, so that Europeans can continue to take advantage of them and their resources. So, without a doubt, the obvious systemic impoverishment imposed by colonial bloodsuckers like Europeans will always reveal that Africans, if that system is not severed, will be reduced to survivalists. See, they will be hungry for just the normal things of life like food, clothing, shelter, and not really care about their consciousness. You cannot be a Pan-African on an empty stomach. You cannot be a Pan-African on an empty stomach. It's impossible. You understand? I mean, you who are in America, you have the $1 hot dog advantage. You understand? In some parts of the motherland, it's a luxury. So when you are reduced to a survivalist, you're not talking black power, you're not talking emancipation, where there is degradation going on. If you have been reduced to someone who is hungry, you will not even see the degradation. You just want to eat. You just want to eat. Unfortunately, the mentality of Africans are like that. So that's why you see that nobody's talking about liberation. Everybody's looking for money. Everybody's looking for how to game you and to squeeze money out of you and stuff like that. It's, for the most part, that's not every single person, but for the most part, those who are consciously asleep and have been reduced to survivalists are going to be prone to doing that. So the method of quest for anything, when audacity is handed down to the motherland African for the most part, it's rooted in subtle European dichotomy. Every time there's dichotomy of any kind, separation, right, which is part of the Yorugu's characteristic, written by Marimbani, okay, when that separation happens, dichotomy takes effect, And in this instance, when puppeteer governments were handed down to European puppets, somebody always sits in the background and watches the show while everybody counts themselves. And so you go back to an African nation and you notice that who really cares about me when folks are fighting themselves? That's the separation of the economy part. It's been passed down, and some of them are busy trying to create dichotomies among themselves while they are being exploited. So understand these additives to the fundamentals of motherland Africans, the mentality stems from some of these elements I've named. Be careful and don't fall victim to a fantasy world. Okay? When you go there, think without having this elements in mind, you fall victim. You give yourself away and fall victim to a fantasy world that every African is Pan-African. You can't be Pan-African on an empty stomach. The person who did that had to sacrifice something. Jerry Rollins had a little bit of that. He said, I don't know any laws and I don't understand economics, but I know it when my stomach is empty, and he came up with a revolution and he did what he could do. Not everybody is built like that, or not everybody gets an awakening like that. Okay. But I want to leave us with that to ponder about, and I hope this creates some kind of healing mechanism, or at least a predisposition to how you look at motherland Africans. Because many I see are coming from a place of assumption and they get their hopes dashed, and it's very, very painful. So when some of these elements are put in perspective, it may reduce the disappointment that you have when you meet certain motherland Africans. It's imperative for Africans to rise to consciousness, and I was privileged enough, to find African American Studies department in Temple University, and it changed my perspective. But not everybody is privileged to find that. Many who are talking have not researched enough, are talking out of ignorance. Just pulling stuff out of your bum and just talking. You can't use contemporary propaganda and hearsay to judge circumstances. They are deep-rooted things. Understanding the African American is a curricular field of study by itself. People get a PhD in it, so it's not, it's not a piece of cake, and many don't understand that. They just come from like shallow waters. It takes deep waters to draw to understand the knowledge that needs to be understood about African Americans and their consciousness. So I'll leave us with that, and I hope this hits home run. Thanks.